Studies minor, in case any of you are interested. And I'm also co-advisor to the LGBTS Alliance. This is our 6th annual Coming Out for Equality convocation in support of our diverse campus community and National Coming Out Day. This is a day in which we celebrate people coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, genderqueer, gender fluid, gender diverse, and gender nonconforming, and the list goes on. Additionally, it is a day in which we celebrate people coming out as supportive allies, also, of the LGBTQ community. So we thank all of you for coming today. It means a lot. We have an exciting lineup of speakers today with an alumnus and community member, Leo Walters-Tahara, faculty member, Dr. Tracy Howell, and students Tony No and Erica Soros. Last year, we reflected on the 2015 marriage equality victory in the Supreme Court. And that led to the extension of marriage equality in the United States. With this decision, as well as a number of court victories since then, it has become feasible for people to marry the person they love, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. And this has facilitated LGBTQ couples to marry the person they love, but also to grow their families with very relative ease. So in 2016, we have also had some important victories, and I want to just take stock of those before we get started. One of those is that the Pentagon has actually lifted the ban on transgender military service, and they just recently announced that they're going to provide service members and their families coverage for gender-affirming health care, including reassignment surgeries and hormone treatment. At the same time, on the other side, many states have developed legislation overturning local anti-discrimination ordinances to protecting LGBTQ people. And they also have developed legislation restricting access to restrooms and facilities corresponding to the sex assigned at birth, as opposed to gender identity. Some of the proponents of those laws were previously opponents of marriage equality. And many researchers, like myself, feel that this wave of bathroom bills, as we've come to call them, is part of an indirect backlash also against marriage equality by opponents who feel that that is no longer something that's winnable for them. In May, the Education and Justice Departments, under President Obama's oversight, issued a directive saying that transgender students must be afforded civil rights protections under Title IX, the federal law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in educational programs and activities. That includes the right to use bathrooms and locker rooms that align with their gender identities. The Obama administration threatened to withhold federal funding from schools over this issue. As a result, there are currently 2 lawsuits that have been filed in federal courts by big groups of states that are trying to uphold their bans, especially on restroom access. So in August, a federal judge in Texas basically issued a nationwide injunction barring the Obama administration from penalizing school districts, and so we are now awaiting the outcome of those 2 cases. So that's where we stand with those. In 2015, the Federal Equality Act was introduced. This legislation would basically ban explicit discrimination against individuals based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, in employment, housing, access to public places, credit, education, jury service, etc. In addition, it would also prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex to access to public places. So this is a really big deal. And it's noteworthy that presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has come out in support of this act, but presidential candidate Donald Trump is not in support of this act. In order to pass the Equality Act, more members of Congress are needed to support this legislation. And there are many ways to get involved in lobbying and other grassroots advocacy if you want to support this bill. If you're interested, I recommend that you look at the website for Freedom for All Americans, as well as Human Rights Campaign, to learn about how to get involved. So, having taken stock a little bit of where we are legally, I would like to take a moment just to reflect on coming out. There's so many ways of coming out about our identity, about many aspects of our identity, and our support for LGBT rights. There's no right way or time to come out. And it's really important that we respect each other, and the fact that we each have to gauge when and where we come out. and also that we don't inadvertently out someone else in an environment they may not be out. I always think it's important to say that because sometimes we take for granted how easy it is to come out today, and it still can be very challenging, and so we have to respect each other. On a personal level, coming out means being true to one's identity and values, living your life authentically, celebrating who you are, being acknowledged for who you are, and not needing to constantly worry about outing yourself or being selective about what you reveal about yourself. Coming out is also essential for political change because when people share their personal stories and these narratives help others understand the negative impacts of discrimination and also the positive impacts of policy changes that affirm LGBT rights, that's how we actually create political change. As an out faculty member who does research on activism concerning LGBT rights, I have received incredible support from my colleagues and from my students here at Bradford. We are very fortunate to live in a political climate in which this is possible, but more progress is needed, not just here in the US, but especially in many other countries where things are a lot worse. So we really need to have solidarity, I think, globally. The bright colors everyone is wearing today are in solidarity with our campus and global alliances between the LGBTQ community and straight allies. Please feel free to take a ribbon outside. When we're finished, there's some cookies in the room on the side too. Grab some cookies, and then we're going to be marching over to the statue, the panther statue, for a picture. So that's sort of the agenda. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Leo Wolters Tahara.
I usually like to get closer and walk around, but I'm going to try to stay behind the mic, just in case it's being recorded, because I think it is. So, my name is Leo. I went to Pitt-Bradford in a scarily long time ago. Let it suffice to say it's longer than you want to know. So, I don't know, I woke up one day and I was like old, and I don't know when that happened. So, I grew up and spent a lot of my life thinking that I was going to be a pastor. Like, I was deeply convinced that that was my lot in life. Ironically, I've done just about everything since college but be a pastor, which is great because that's what my degree was in, so it's very useful. But I always had this sense of calling that I thought that's what I was going to be. I was going to be working in a church. In reality, I've been many things. I've been an athlete, I've been a photographer, I've been a social worker for almost a decade. More recently, I'm a parent, I'm a cosmetology student, and I'm genderqueer. Coming out initially for me was basically the biggest crisis I had ever experienced. I grew up in this world that was very certain, and there were lots of blacks and lots of whites, and there was a lot of right and wrong because of the religious context that I grew up in. And realizing myself to be, at the time, a lesbian was just basically like dropping a bomb on everything I ever thought I knew. I had the most radical crisis of faith and self-understanding, and it took me, from the first inkling that I thought I might be gay, it took me about 4 or 5 years to say out loud, in an affirmative manner that I was gay. I would say, like, I think I might be gay, I think I might like women, I don't think I'm straight, and it took me a solid 4 to 5 years to say, I am gay. At that point, I came out to my parents during my junior year of college in a pastoral ministry major program at a conservative evangelical college, which, let me tell you, is not entirely a crackpot time to come out as LGBTQ. It didn't entirely go over well with the faculty and staff, but it was what I had to do. And one of the best things about my coming out story, there were a lot of terrible things about it. There was a lot of negative response. There was a lot of excommunication from my family and stuff. But I was lucky enough to have a few key people in place at my college that they were able to kind of step in and take over that parental, friendship, mentor role in my life. One of the people that was in that role was my friend Michelle. She was the dean of students at the time, and at the time I went to my college, it was actually against the rules. You could be kicked out for being gay. And it just so happened that I found myself in Barcelona, Spain, on a mountaintop, looking at a snow-capped mountain, at the border of France, sitting there talking to Michelle. And I realized, I felt this welling up in my throat, and I realized, I needed to tell her. I needed to tell her I was gay. And from that moment on, she was my biggest advocate. To be honest, if she hadn't worked at the school, I wouldn't have graduated. She looked at me in the eye that day, and she said, I think it's okay to be you. like, I love you, you are a good person, and I'm gonna make sure that you graduate. And so actually, the day that I got my transcripts for graduation was the day that she submitted her resignation letter. Of course, we were both crying, and it was a great moment, but it was this moment of like, listen, we've both made it out, because she was in equally as hostile of an environment just for being an ally. But during the course of coming out, it wasn't a one-time thing that happened for me. Like I said, there was a lot of struggle in there, and a lot of just conversations sitting with Michelle, with the door locked, making sure Robin, her secretary, wasn't around so that she couldn't hear the heresy that we were talking about. But we were talking about, what does it mean if you understood yourself to be a pastor and to be a Christian? What does it mean to be gay? Because in the circles that I was in, those weren't two things that coexisted. And she told me a story. She had been a dean of students at a college on the West Coast that was much more liberal. So she was having these conversations a solid 10 years before I was having it with her. And she said she had a student that was in leadership come into her office, and he said to her, like, I'm gay, and I don't know what that means. Like, how can I still hold on to my faith and be a gay person? And so they took a whiteboard, and on the top she wrote, "This is what I believe." And this student wrote down everything that they believed. And then, one by one, they looked at them and they said, is this essential? Like, is this the main thing? If my faith didn't include this, would it still be the same faith? And so what they worked down to was the essential tenets of his faith. And I did the same thing with Michelle. And what I worked down to was that it didn't matter who I loved or how I loved, but what it mattered was that I loved. Because I believe, based on the tenets of faith that I grew up with, if I am doing what is most loving, then I am being the best version of myself. And doing what is most loving, it plays out in all aspects. You can do what's most loving for the world around you, you can do what's most loving for the people that you encounter, and you can do what's most loving for yourself by coming out and by being your most authentic self. I've since taken that and used that in the rest of my life to gauge every sort of decision I've made since then, including transitioning. I realized that there's actually a piece of religious poetry, and it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And I think that means you have to know yourself, and then you have to fiercely be yourself. You have to protect yourself in a world that doesn't want you to exist all the time. And so I've taken that poetry and those understandings of my faith, and I've allowed that to let me become the truest iteration of myself with every new day. And about 635 days ago, that included beginning to medically transition. It's not been an easy road. It's definitely not one that you just kind of wander onto because it's the easiest course. That's my favorite thing, like, it was so easy to be gay. I could have just chosen not to, but being gay was the easier path. Or being trans was the easier path. Let me tell you, it's not the easier path, but it was the right path for me. So I, in this process of transitioning, have had to come to a radical understanding of having grace with myself. Everything's not black and white. Everything is not right or wrong. In many ways, life itself is queer. There are very few situations that are this or that. There are very few people that are this or that. In every situation that we come to in our life, we need to have a sense of grace for ourselves and those around us, because every person you meet is transitioning in some way. If we're constantly growing as a person, we should be constantly changing our understandings of ourselves and the world around us, and that requires for us to have a lot of sense of love and grace as we move about our paths. The world is a spectrum and life is queer. And by me standing here today, making it out of that environment to be who I am today, it wasn't easy, but I made it. I made it because a lot of people loved me and because I found the ability to love me in a context where I wasn't supposed to do that. I wasn't supposed to love myself, but somehow I made it out of that, and I think it's because of the supports I've had around me. The thing that I want you guys to leave knowing today is that if I can be here, you can be here too. And if I can be here and be authentic, then you can be here and be authentic too. Because no matter what, there's at least one other person that gets existing outside of the binary. There's at least one other person that understands, listen, we don't have all the answers and we don't necessarily know what the end product is going to be like, but life is a spectrum and the world is queer and you can exist as you are in it, and I will give you grace to be that person even if no one else does. I'm confident in a room like this, there's a lot of other people that are going to give you grace, but even if there wasn't, I would. And we need to stand together, especially on National Coming Out Day, to stand up and say, listen, we're all very different, we're all queer, we don't fit into necessarily one category in some way or the other, but that that difference, that gives us solidarity. And we have a privilege to stand up in a world today and say we're here and we're queer, and that's something that we can celebrate. Thank you.
Without further ado, Dr. Tracy Campbell.
It's my turn. I'm going to echo a lot of Leo's beautifully said sentiments. I really like what you had to say. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being here. And thank you, committee, for asking me to talk today. This is absolutely, and forgive me if I get emotional. I'm just going to get emotional, so bear with me. This is one of my favorite events that we have on this campus, and I think it's really incredible and awesome. And let's just take a minute to celebrate that this is the 6th year. This is the 6th celebration. Let's take a minute. It's important that we take this time to celebrate not just National Coming Out Day, but ourselves and each other and being here today. I think one reason why this event always just totally fills me with joy and with glee and with emotion that I can't contain is that I am of the generation that has seen and felt in every way the dramatic difference in the U.S. That has occurred over the years, not just in terms of LGBTQ policy and of human and civil rights, but just the change in basic mainstream attitude and perceptions of LGBTQ people. I grew up in, some of you know, I grew up just down the road over one of these there hills in Olean, New York, just over the state line. And I'm of that generation that hit that special time in a young person's life we call puberty. Just as what was known in the day as the AIDS crisis was hitting really hard. I was in junior high school health class talking about the gay disease and being told how I, as an individual, as a person, as a sexual person, had to take pains to protect myself against this gay disease. I remember later on when I was in college thinking about that. Not just the pathology of it, not just the pathologizing of being gay, but the fact that every single one of us in that health class, in junior high, right? Just entering that time of coming to know oneself as a sexual being, as a creature. Our whole understanding of sexuality was under the auspices of contagion. That's something that I still live with and think about it. My introduction to sexuality and that part of my identity was through fear and hatred and discrimination. That's a pretty big burden for any of us to carry. I'm of the generation for whom certainly sitting in that junior high school health class or later in high school, Olean High, if anyone suspected that you were gay or in any way different, you could expect to have to be able to defend yourself against physical violence, against emotional violence, against psychological violence. I certainly am a witness to that violence. I'm also of the generation that experiencing that violence said, this really truly is illogical. You're putting these labels on things and on people, but we have to be more than just a label. Logic simply demands it. And I love the generation, and here I am going to come out to you today as an older woman. I love that generation that really began to use that sense of unity as a mobilizing force. That's one reason why I love the title of this event, right? Coming out for equality. I think that it applies to all of us. Certainly the notion of equality does, right? It is, and imagine capital letters here, equality is what we say we believe in as Americans, right? It's what we fight for, what we have suffered for, what we continue to fight for. But that's a wonderful title for this event, because whether we are straight or bi or questioning or queer in any sense, and no matter the gender identities that we embrace or resist, and whether or not we speak them aloud, we all have our coming out stories, as Leo said. So as I said, I'm going to come out as an older lady who in 1993 marched on Washington as part of what became a pretty historic moment for the LGBTQ movement. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Some of you are, like me, old enough to know of it. If not, Google it. It was certainly a March on Washington that took its title very consciously from the 1963 March on Washington. To say, yes, we are a part of that tradition of insistence on human and civil rights. And we are marching on DC, the power structure, to insist on it. But it was also one of the first marches on Washington after the 1963 march to just blow people's minds in terms of sheer volume. I think it was, I don't know the name of the actual government agency, the U.S. Park Service maybe, that started sending out reports. There are tens of thousands of people here. No, wait, we're wrong. There are 200,000 people. No, wait, we're wrong. There are like 600,000 people here on the mall in D.C. We don't know how we're going to deal with this huge crowd. Wait, there are so many people here. It's probably over 1 million. We're just going to stop guesstimating. I can just tell you, to be there in that crowd, that energy, I mean, not even having enough space to move in 1993 was incredibly powerful. And maybe because it was like a moment of euphoria for me, I will confess that I didn't really pay much attention to the speakers, except for RuPaul, who was fabulous beyond belief. Well, yes. So I wanted to look it up to see what was the actual platform. And I want to read you the preamble and the core components of that platform, if you'll let me. So this is from April 25th, 1993. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement, and I just want to stop there. Transgender was a part of this statement. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement recognizes that our quest for social justice fundamentally links us to the struggles against racism and sexism, class bias, economic injustice, and religious intolerance. We must realize if one of us is oppressed, we all are oppressed. The diversity of our movement requires and compels us to stand in opposition to all forms of oppression that diminish the quality of life for all people. We will be vigilant in our determination to rid our movement and our society of all forms of oppression and exploitation, so that all of us can develop to our full human potential potential without limiting regard to race, religion, sexual orientation, identification, identity, gender, and gender expression, ability, age, or class. That statement, that platform went on to demand passage of an LGBT civil rights bill and an end to discrimination by state and federal governments, including the military. To demand increase in funding for AIDS education and universal access to health care, and an end to sexism in medical research. It went on to demand legislation to prevent discrimination against LGBTQ people in the areas of family diversity, custody, adoption, and foster care, and the definition of family itself. It went on to demand full and equal inclusion of LGBTQ people in the educational system, and inclusion of LGBTQ studies in multicultural curricula. You can be your own judge whether that is true on this campus or not, or your own campus. It went on to demand the right to reproductive freedom and choice, the right to control our own bodies, and an end to sexist discrimination. And finally, it went on to demand an end to racial and ethnic discrimination in all forms. So one of the reasons why this event fills me with such joy is that for as long as I have known it, as long as I have been a part of it, the LGBTQ movement, here's the emotion, sorry, has always, of course, been about yes, you know, lesbian, gay, transgender, and queer identity and pride. Yes, absolutely. But it's always been about intersectionality. It's been a movement that has insisted upon it, that has said what is radical is that we aren't just one thing. We aren't just one identity. And that we are more powerful when we acknowledge that, when we build our activism and our sense of identities, as Leo said, on that notion of the fullness and the complexity of our identities. We are always more than the boxes that the bullies put us in. I am a Black feminist lesbian poet, Audre Lorde said of her work, and I identify myself as such because if there is one other Black feminist lesbian poet in isolation somewhere within the reach of my voice, I want her to know she is not alone. We all know we're here. It's important to speak who we are, to inhabit those identities, and to take pride in it, to reclaim the identities that may be bandied about and slurred, to love those labels, perform them, be in them, live them with pride. And you can believe that I am absolutely, up until November 8th and perhaps beyond it, I am absolutely using PP rhetoric, pussy positivity, when I speak to my friends and colleagues and family members. We have to do it not only for ourselves, but for those who may be alone. You are not alone, no matter your identities. I want to tell you just one other brief story. It's the first book that ever spoke to me as a writer. Not simply as a reader. Lots of books speak to me as a reader, and always have, but as a writer. It was a book by James Baldwin called Giovanni's Room. And I don't know, for some reason, trolling through the Olean Public Library, I happened upon this book. Nobody told me about it. I just picked it up and started reading. And I don't know if you know James Baldwin, one of our famous American writers who happened to be Black, who happened to be gay, lived for many years outside of the United States. So anyway, for some reason, I found this book, Giovanni's Room, and it captured me. And absolutely, I connected to the story and to the characters. because it's an excellent and well-written book, right? That's what good readers do, they capture you. But what electrified me, what sang to me about that book, it wasn't the story of the protagonist who is exploring his sexuality and thinking, maybe I can't be with this woman. David, the protagonist, is a gay man, a man who's questioning who he is. Maybe I can't be with this woman, although I sure do care about her. Maybe I will be with him because he's pretty beautiful. Maybe that's who I am. I mean, I connected to that story, but what I identified with was the way that James Baldwin put language together. I felt it, I knew it, I got his style, I identified with it, it was me, and I thought to myself for the first time, so maybe I am a writer. Maybe I'm not alone. We are complex creatures, we beautiful human beings, we are influenced by each other all the time, by many. As Leo so eloquently said, I'm sorry, I had to write it down, the world is a spectrum and life is queer. I know I am, as probably many of us are, being influenced by the rhetoric in the air today, the language being bandied about, the statements being made in this year's presidential race. I will come out to you today and say, I am not only a woman of some age and experience, but I am a woman who is full of anger. I mean, I am beyond angry. I am frightened by the amount of anger that I feel, and the amount of sadness that I feel, and the real fear that I feel. Part of what makes me so mad, it's not just being reduced to my pudenda, which is the polite P word. We are in Wick Chapel. It's the notion that I am going to fall for the tired, old divide and conquer strategy. Yeah, I may have a pussy, I may even in your eyes believe be a pussy, okay, whatever. But I'm also a fierce intellect, and a wise and knowing soul, and a daughter, and an aunt, and a thick and agile athlete, and a poet who is shy, and an essayist who is not, and a reader, and a teacher, and a sister, and a friend, and a singer, and a lover, and a believer in grace. Oh, and most importantly, on November 8th, I'm also a voter. We can come out for intersectionality by choosing to open ourselves up to difference, even if it's frightening, even if it's hard, by simply being curious. We are, as Leo mentioned, complex creatures, we human beings. And for me, that's why I teach literature. Stories allow us to experience that complexity from the perspective of the other. As one more writer, you know I gotta sneak one more in, right? As Ralph Ellison wrote in the 1981 introduction to his incredible masterpiece, Invisible Man, one of the purposes of much of the literature of our time, of our generations, plural, is to consciously, quote, reveal the human complexity which stereotypes are intended to conceal. The time is now to reveal that complexity, to remind ourselves and each other of our interconnections, and to stand alongside each other in each and every struggle. If you believe Black Lives Matter, stand with the people protesting that Black Lives Matter. Just do it. You will feel embraced and connected. If you believe that there is work to be done in the LGBTQ movement, as Helma mentioned, there are many victories that have occurred, but there is still work to be done. Find something that you can do. And just in the day-to-day life existence that we all lead, when you experience or hear those little microaggressions, speak out. Don't let it stand unresponded to. want to challenge us all to keep examining our privileges and our power and use them both to support one another. As the great Queen Latifah said, one more. UNITY, that's unity. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. My name is Tony Ngo, and I would like to just start off things by saying I'm a proud ally to the LGBT community, and here's what I have to say. I honestly grew up in a household where there was no room for hate, because, there's just no time for it. I grew up in a rather poor household, and, survival was what kept us going. And through it all, my mother always taught me, Tony, wherever you go, always have a smile on your face. Always show the people around you that you have nothing but love in your heart. Equality is always something that we should fight for. Equality and justice go hand in hand and cannot exist without the other. There can be no peace without justice. I myself have always been someone that has fought for equal rights for all people on this beautiful earth. In my eyes, we are all equal, and we deserve to love and be happy with whoever we choose. Sadly, many people to this day just don't see it that way. They have fear in their hearts, fear of the different, fear of change. That fear leads to hatred and leads to ignorance. Equal rights for the LGBT community was something that I also fought for, because I honestly thought it was just wrong, truly wrong, for someone to stop another person from doing what they love and from loving who they love. In my eyes, love is the great power that heals all things that is wrong with this world. When that love is threatened, I believe that we should all stand up and fight for it. I knew that one day love would prevail, and it has. When the U.S. Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states, it was at that moment that I knew that all those years of hard work that the LGBT community put in, it finally paid off. Love finally overcame. It was a truly huge step in the process of equality, but behind the picture, there's still much work to be done. Behind the scenes, hatred still lurks in the waters of equality. Same-sex marriage is now legal, but there are still people out there who just can't accept that change, who just can't accept that love. I remember a time, one of my closest friends to this day was going through the process of coming out. From what I've seen, from what I've heard, and from what I've witnessed, it is truly a process that is very delicate, and it needs to be handled with nothing but care. It was really hard for him to come out because of the fact that he grew up in a rather very religious household. His father was really conservative, and from what I've met, he just was not the type of person that would accept gay people openly. It was especially hard for himself because, he had to go against everything that he grew up knowing, everything that he believed. And he felt he was alone. And that led to him being disgusted with himself. He started to hate himself more and more as he tried to figure things out. And I knew it was because of how he was raised. I remember the fear in his eyes when he was talking to me about how he would present this information to his parents. To this day, he still never told his parents. But, on the brighter side, he has come to accept himself for who he is. And I believe that I played a big role in that because I told him that he's not alone and he deserves to love, as we all deserve to love. It was at that moment, that fear that I saw in his eyes, that I knew that I wanted to put a stop to this. I wanted to be changed. And so, that's when I decided decided to become an ally. So I educated myself on all the issues of the LGBT community. I became more understanding because of it. I used to be naive. I used to think it was just 2016, that stuff is over with. But it's not. It's still here with us. And I just believe that for too long, the LGBT community has suffered for it. I truly believe that one day we can all live in harmony if we all just stand up together and fight for what we believe is right. No matter what your race, sex, orientation, you do not deserve to live in fear. You deserve to thrive, and you deserve to be loved. Thank you.
LGBTS Alliance. As your secretary, I have just a couple announcements for everyone. One of our biggest events coming up is going to be the second annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, Friday, November 18th, correct? It's going to be from noon to 1 p.m. in the Wick Chapel. And we ask that you please dress respectfully, so nothing offensive. And that's our main event coming up for this semester. As we have more events, you'll see announcements, flyers around. And as we exit for the parade outside to the Panther statue, there are streamers on the two back chairs as you walk out this way. Please feel free to grab them, wave them around, show your pride, if I don't get to them first. And just make sure to return them to either myself